Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Lay of the Land podcast. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today we're going to do something a little bit different as we flip the proverbial script and I step into the role of guest on other podcasts to share some recent developments in my own journey and glimpse into what is coming next. As some of you may know, I recently started a new professional chapter, joining the founding team of the O.H.I.O Fund, and in the near future, I will record a dedicated episode to explore the O.H.I.O Fund in depth with some of my partners. Until then, please join me in these exciting conversations as I share my own insights and stories about transitioning to this new chapter, reflections on building Axuall, Lay of the Land, Cleveland, and a whole lot more. In this specific conversation, I had the opportunity and privilege to sit down with Ashtyn Morris of the Marketing Moves podcast, which is hosted by VividFront. We've actually featured VividFront on Lay of the Land's 124th episode featuring Andrew Spott. So please go check out that if you want to hear more about VividFront and Andrew's journey. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Ashtyn Morris.
Welcome to another episode of Marketing Moves. I'm your host, Ashtyn Morris, Senior Account Executive at VividFront. I'm so excited for today's episode as I have the chance to interview Jeffrey Stern. Jeffrey is a man of many talents and interests. As co-founder of Axuall, host and creator of the Lay of the Land podcast, and most recently, the principal of the O.H.I.O Fund. Jeffrey has made his mark on Cleveland, which is why I'm so grateful to have the chance to sit down with him today to learn more about his story and the work he and his team are doing through the O.H.I.O Fund, which recently raised $108 million for the first fund closing in early July. Jeffrey, welcome to Marketing Moves.
Thank you, Ashtyn. It is a pleasure to be here.
So excited. So you're not often in the interviewee seat, so this will be a great opportunity for us to introduce you to our audience and learn a little bit more about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your story, and how you ended up here in Cleveland?
Sure. It is not an accident that I tend to find myself much more often in your seat than in this one. In sharing a bit about myself, there's a fun poem that comes to mind. A wise old owl lived in an oak. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we all like that wise old bird? And I cannot tell you exactly why, but I've always identified with the owl as an old soul and with a natural proclivity much more to listen than I speak. So the gravity in that chair is a lot stronger. Mm-hmm. But it's fun to be somewhat uncomfortable and have to share more about my own thoughts and experiences. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it.
I don't think I could ever recite a poem from top of mind, so that was very impressive.
Thank you.
How did you end up in Cleveland?
Sure. Well, I think really by chance and luck at this point in reflection. No ties to Cleveland, familial or otherwise, although I did learn after I moved here that my grandfather was born in Akron.
Oh, wow.
And then proceeded to spend no time here, and I didn't even know about it until after he had passed away, actually. But if there was a compass that was kind of guiding me directionally through, if Cleveland was the destination of that, the true north of the compass, I think it was probably a curiosity and desire for learning that ultimately brought me here. Tactically, it was a program called Venture for America, which was a fellowship program for recent college graduates to match them with startups in cities across the country that tend to lack what I would call the young person gravity of a New York or a San Francisco, kind of inspired by the ethos and the model of Teach for America, but with this entrepreneurial bend to it. Mm-hmm. And in optimizing for trying to learn, I was very drawn to entrepreneurship as a mechanism for learning in practice, what I thought is a more prudent way than in theory. Mm-hmm. And so I feel lucky that it was Cleveland, but it could have been anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how long have you been here?
About 8 years now.
Wow. What was one of the biggest misconceptions you had about Cleveland before coming here?
Wow. Well, I'll keep rattling off quotes as they come to mind because I don't.
This is impressive.
So Mark Twain had a bit about travel being fatal to prejudice and to narrow-mindedness, and that if you are to cultivate kind of a wholesome and charitable interpretation of people and of things, you can't just vegetate in your corner of the world. And I don't know that I had a misconception about Cleveland rather than I didn't have much of a perception at all of what it was like. But I know that in retrospect, having come here, it's just the most pleasantly surprising place. For whatever reason, I find Clevelanders have a real simultaneous pride and self-deprecation, and maybe only the self-deprecation ever made it externally outside of the city. And I've just been blown away by the people, by the nature, by just so many of the realities of this place that never seem to match the perception that people have of it.
I love that. Well, before we're talking about your newest role as principal of the O.H.I.O Fund, I want to take some time to talk about your other professional pursuits because you have quite the resume. You co-founded Axuall, a workforce intelligence company built on a national real-time practitioner data network to transform how industry leaders analyze, recruit, onboard, and engage clinicians. As a startup, you and your team raised an impressive $41 million. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and your journey to becoming a co-founder?
Absolutely. And you got the pronunciation correct. It is a word that...
It's a weird word.
It is a weird word. Phonetically wrong, but we got the URL. That was, important.
The name of the game.
Internet presence. So the founding of Axuall came in the aftermath of my fellowship with Venture for America, where I had the experience to have joined the founding team of the time of a company called Vodum. And over the 3 years working there, we grew from myself and one other fellow actually, and the founder of the company to about 70 folks. The detour there is that we were building election infrastructure, software for voting systems, for secretaries of state to offer to their citizens, particularly for folks who, what the government calls O.H.I.O voters, but basically people who have accessibility considerations, members of the military living abroad. The 2 astronauts stuck in space would be bucketed under that umbrella right now. If they needed to vote, how do they do it? So we were working with the government to help afford that opportunity to citizens in the democratic process. An incredible experience. We grew to work with a few dozen secretaries of state, and but ultimately the business didn't really work out. So that company kind of failed in somewhat of a spectacular fashion in early 2019. But in the aftermath of it, somewhat disheartened by the outcome, but not by the process. And I came out of it with a deep appreciation and love and fulfillment for company building and entrepreneurship, knowing that was really what I wanted to do, but without an idea for what to build next. And so what I opted to do, and this is also really the origins of the podcast for Lay of the Land, was I set out to meet as many local founders in Cleveland as I possibly could to get a sense for who they were as people, what motivated them, what inspired them to solve the kinds of problems they were interested in solving, and some of the tactics of company building. And to my surprise, I think, again, really the reason I'm still here in Cleveland was the openness and receptiveness that people had to a total stranger reaching out to them at that point in time to ask all those kinds of questions, really just from a place of curiosity. I think everyone said yes. Not a single person said no. And so I got to meet about 70 local founders in that period of time. And one of them turned out to be working through the ideation for what would become Axuall at the time. And we kind of joined forces at a period with my former head of engineering at the last company as he was kind of making his way through what he called a gratitude tour. As his last company was also a company here in Cleveland called Exploris, which he had sold to IBM, and it became the Watson Health platform. And we were talking with all of the chief medical officers that he had worked with about if they could, kind of wave a magic wand, what other problem would they want for us to solve? And enough of them had said credentialing and privileging, which we didn't really know what that was, but we're like, oh, great, and you'll pay for a solution? Absolutely. So it really just came from asking who we wanted to be our prospective customers, what problem they wanted us to help solve.
That's a crazy story, but a cool story. How long did it take from that initial conversation to getting the funds and really building it?
Well, we spent a lot of time trying to get it right, going slow to go fast, as we like to think about it, where there's this kind of startup framework of move fast and break things, and that maybe is like a fun approach, but with things of great importance, such as healthcare and government infrastructure, that strategy is has its challenges.
Yeah.
And so when we're working with health systems, we really wanted to ensure that what we built worked, solved the problem that we set out to solve, which is this credentialing and privileging problem and the time it takes to onboard doctors within health systems. And so we spent a lot of time with local health systems, Metro Health, university hospitals, really ingrained in the medical staff office. I spent maybe half a year trying to just map and understand why it is that they do the things they do today and how it came to be that way, and where is the opportunity for us to kind of rethink the whole way things are done.
So cool. As co-founder and director of product management, what were some of your main responsibilities?
Well, the way I always thought about product management was at kind of this intersection of shaping the product. Why are we building what we're building? What is the vision and impetus and strategy behind it? Actually shaping the product in the actual engineering and architecture and building of it, and then ultimately syncing everyone in the company around both of those things, setting the right expectations, ensuring that the product that we've set out to build actually solves the problem for the customer and does the thing that we said it was going to do. And so I kind of tried to ground everything that we were doing as an organization in, are we helping? Are we actually solving a problem? Not just, are we building cool technology, but just really tethering it to the reality of, are we making things better and easier for the people who are spending their entire professions, careers focused on just doing this kind of work? And can we make it easier for them?
Awesome. What were some of your biggest takeaways from Axuall? Is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
There are a lot of takeaways. I think one of the core themes, at least from a product management standpoint, was when you find a problem where the justification for the way that it's done today is just that's the way we've always done it, rather than from a place of necessity, that's probably a process worth reconsidering, why it is that way. And I think that's often where the greatest opportunity for building something in the form of a product or a company comes around. And so that to me was kind of galvanized by my whole experience doing this. I mean, things I would do differently, the whole startup process is one of constantly just getting humbled by reality. And I don't know that I would have changed the way we did anything, because I value the learnings that I got from the whole process very much. But I would say from a culture standpoint and like a leadership standpoint, I mean, to me, the best of leadership is, where you've articulated the vision both at a high level, but also to individuals so clearly that, they are inspired by it, see the potential, and you help them to realize that both at an organizational and individual level. And the culture around that being one where you've created the space where people feel comfortable talking about all the things not going well, because it is such a constantly humbling process of things never going well. The whole startup is just never going well. And it's about how you prioritize what fires to put out. And so if you're in an environment where people do not feel comfortable talking about the things that are not going well, then it kind of creates this vicious downward cycle where people begin to optimize for maybe the wrong things, for avoiding risks, for just more from a place of fear than of inspiration. And it's only kind of in reflection that I've thought about how to articulate that. And I think were I to do it again, I would be more explicit about stewarding the kind of culture and creating that space for people to feel comfortable being vulnerable that I think is important. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of it's all learnings.
No, that's amazing. I think a lot of people, even if they're not in the startup space, can take a lot away from what you just said in terms of if you're operating from a mindset of being fearful of what's going to happen, then you're not really giving yourself the best shot in whatever you're doing. And that perspective, I think, is key.
Absolutely.
I would be remiss to not talk about your podcast, Lay of the Land. I am a huge fan of it. I love listening to your weekly episodes. You share stories of entrepreneurship, startups, and builders in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. And you have nearly 200 episodes, which is crazy to think about, making you one of the most well-known podcasts here in Cleveland. What made you start Lay of the Land? That might be a loaded question. Yeah, I know you kind of touched on it a little bit before.
Yeah. So if one of the consequences of those, many dozen or so conversations in 2019 was finding my co-founder and the starting of Axuall, the other was a set of observations that came from those conversations, which to me were surprising. One was the degree to which none of the founders and CEOs that I talked to knew who each other were. Just no one seemed to know who the other builders and entrepreneurs in our proximate area were. That was surprising to me. It was surprising to me the degree to which Clevelanders didn't know who these folks were. Many of whom, all of whom in my mind were inspiring people of, a formidable capability that have built impressive organizations, both from the seed stage all the way through to public company CEOs, multi-billion-dollar organizations. So Clevelanders didn't know who they were. And the third was the complete dearth of media coverage of any of them, who I had been convinced, had almost any of these folks been in New York or San Francisco, would have garnered the whole media mechanism to amplify the stories of these entrepreneurs, the success that they've achieved, and even the struggle and trials and tribulations of the journey along the way. And so when I kind of pieced these things together, there were a few motivations I had for the podcast. One was that I just wanted to introduce these people to each other. Mm-hmm. The whole process of building a company is really hard. It's really difficult, can be very lonely. And oftentimes the folks that are best to seek counsel from are those who can empathize, but who are outside your company, which is other founders. And so I thought there was a real opportunity as I was starting my own founder journey to build the group of peer support that I wish existed in the community. And so part of it was a selfish bit on that front.
Nothing wrong with that.
who, from all these folks that I genuinely had been inspired by. The other was kind of with the Venture for America hat on. If you are a young entrepreneurially inclined kid in Cleveland and you aspire to do something in that realm, and you do not know who the people are in your community who have achieved the kind of success that you hope to achieve someday, then you're going to just be even further inclined to go to a place where you know that those kinds of people exist, like in San Francisco or New York. And so I thought there was a real opportunity to amplify these stories so that other people in the community could know about what I felt to be very inspirational stories. And, as I came in my time here in Cleveland to appreciate the Midwestern kindness and warmth of people, the humility that's kind of embedded in that whole sentiment, I love. But if there was a downside to it, I felt it was kind of in this, bragging is not the right word even, but like a lack of recognition and celebration of success and excellence and, things worthy of aspiration. And, I'm a New Yorker. I'm not from Cleveland. I feel like I'm masquerading as one.
You're a Clevelander now.
I resonate a lot with that whole, Midwestern energy, but I have no problem trying to amplify these stories of all the people that I've met who have inspired me truly to try and build cohesion amongst the community here and amplify their stories so that people know that really cool stuff is happening in Cleveland.
Did you ever expect it to take off in the way that it has?
It's I've never, and in the spirit of marketing, haven't really ever marketed it. It's really been a community building exercise, one person at a time, facilitating, I think, many hundreds of introductions at this point. But I think the bottom up grassroots effort of it has kind of grounded roots at this point that has allowed it just slowly but surely to grow in time as we are able to bring more people on the podcast to amplify their stories, much in the way that you're doing.
I love that. Do you have any tips or advice for people who want to start their own podcast? Do you need like a full setup? Can you do it?
Well, logistically, I think, even today, it's much easier to do a podcast than I had realized it was 4 years ago. The tools, we were talking about the AI capability as a companion for audio transcription, for the sound engineering on the back end. It's pretty doable. And for me, it has brought me great joy and fulfillment to do it. And I certainly wouldn't have anticipated that it would have evolved in this kind of way when I started it, but came from a place really just, again, of curiosity mostly. And so I would say if you would want to start a podcast, you should give it a shot. I see no reason why not.
It's very accessible, very doable.
Very accessible, very doable. And it memorializes stories in I think a really cool way. The number of times I've now heard from people, mostly guests who've been on the podcast, that their kid really appreciated hearing these stories that they never heard about their parent before.
Yeah.
Those are evergreen. The internet will, forever hold them, and that's been pretty fun.
I feel very similarly in terms of sometimes we record all these episodes and it's always fun in the moment. I look forward to it as well, but it warms my heart a little bit in terms of I had some fun episodes with a lot of different people, some of my friends, and knowing that we've had this captured, and one day when we're 67 years old, I feel like, oh, do you remember when we did that? And we could listen to it. So it's really cool from that perspective, especially when you take a wide view at it.
It captures a moment.
Yeah, definitely. This question might be akin to asking a parent if they have a favorite child, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a favorite interview on your podcast or a must-listen episode? I know this.
It is an impossible question. I will pay respect and homage to the place we are in right now, and I have to call out Andrew Spott, who, is a close friend and I think did an excellent job. I mean, it's really difficult. There are so many different times in different situations where different conversations come to mind based on different wisdom that people have had. And I mean, if anything, it's kind of just reinforced this idea that there truly is something to learn from everyone. But I'll call out one because it inspired more than most have in terms of my personal response and reaction to it, which was a conversation with Lila Mills, who is the CEO and founding editor-in-chief of Signal Cleveland, which is a nonprofit local news organization here in Cleveland. And I was inspired enough by her story and the work that she's doing to actually get involved on the advisory board of the organization. That one kind of hit a chord in a way that, I mean, many of them do, but don't often have afforded the opportunity for me to get directly involved.
Yeah. I'll have to listen to it. The first episode I listened to was the one with Andrew, obviously, but it was great. And it really I was hooked ever since. Well, now that we've spent some time talking about your different endeavors, I want to transition to talking about the O.H.I.O Fund, which is your newest adventure. Recently, you and other venture capitalists raised $108 million for the first fund closing in early July, which goes without saying is an incredible feat. I would like to preface that this is a little outside of my realm, so before getting too deep into the conversation, I want to first do a quick little vocabulary lesson for our listeners who may not be as familiar with venture capital. So, in simple terms, can you break down what the O.H.I.O Fund is and how you operate?
I can do my best.
Well, it's better than what I can do.
We'll see how simple it is. So, the O.H.I.O Fund is a fund, meaning that we've collected investments from people who believe in what we're doing as an impact fund to ultimately deploy into opportunities that we think will drive the financial and economic kind of impact that we've set out to achieve under the umbrella of the thesis of the O.H.I.O Fund.
That was great.
Yeah,
that was simple, straight to the point. When you announced your new chapter with the O.H.I.O Fund, you did share some information with your network about the technological trends of today. As I reviewed them, I knew I wanted to take some time to discuss them with you today, as you have some pretty dynamic points that I'd love for you to expand upon. I'm going to read them off, and to preface, this is a little bit of a monologue, so bear with me.
Well, I apologize then, because it's probably my monologue. So.
No, it was great, but I want you to expand upon it because I could not do it justice. So, you noted that the desire for domestic, secure, and robust supply chains, the infusion of software and automation into hardware, the rising demand for energy storage and usage tied to AI growth, and the exponential decline in the cost of computing, the falling cost of electricity production, the increasingly competitive positioning of renewables, and the visibility of nuclear within the Overton window, the rise of electric vehicles, and the economic incentives of the IRA and CHIPS Act to reshore and develop these manufacturing competencies locally make Ohio apt to ride this industrial wave once again and to be a leading force in reindustrialization. So, Jeffrey, can you elaborate on these points and explain how they are making Ohio so appealing for venture capital?
I certainly have a way with words.
No, it was great. It was very powerful. But I was like, you know what? I want Jeffrey to talk about it.
There's another quote that comes to mind, which I'll do my best to rattle off here. But there was an Ohio politician in the 1830s, Caleb Atwater, who suggested that Ohio is peculiarly felicitous.
It's a mouthful.
As to soil, productions, and climate that it would be their own fault if they were not the happiest people in the union. And to me, the way to think about these trends, and we can talk about them, but in the context of the O.H.I.O Fund, if you believe that Ohio is well positioned, if you jump forward into the future 20, 30 years and you look back at what would have had to happen for Ohio to be in the place that it is, having taken advantage of those trends, it's not a given that it just happens. The O.H.I.O Fund is meant to be a catalyst for finding the opportunities that are on those structural trends that we can invest in and ensure that Ohio is able to actually achieve that kind of success that we think it should and can have. So the reindustrialization idea is kind of a fun one because it harkens to the history of Ohio and our know-how and competency and history of building things. At one point in the not too distant past, Ohio was accounted for half of the world's rubber production, a vast majority of the movement and production of steel, and really just the building of a lot of things. And in the hollowing out of that, I think, and not just Cleveland, but a lot of the Rust Belt has kind of suffered as a consequence of what that has meant as we've moved manufacturing elsewhere. And I think what's really fun about the whole opportunity of the O.H.I.O Fund today is that there is this resurgence in desire and recognition of the strategic importance of us being able to build things again, and the kind of both financial and economic impact that investing in those kinds of opportunities could have locally.
Wow, that's so cool to think about. I mean, I'm from the Youngstown area. My grandpa used to work in Lordstown at the GM plant, and not so much what I saw, because by the time I was born, things obviously had changed, but just in terms of hearing what my parents talk about, when really some of that industry moved away, it really did change. And I think it's really cool what you guys are doing in terms of really tapping into our roots and seeing how we're positioned to really capitalize on what we have and just our deep history. So it's amazing.
We're trying to play to our strengths that we have as a place.
Yeah. So New York is obviously well known. New York City in particular is well known for being the financial capital of the world. And Silicon Valley, for the last, I would say 30 years or so, has been recognized as one of the hubs for technological innovation and startups. With the O.H.I.O Fund, how are you looking to help set apart our region in the VC world?
Yeah, well, I'll expand upon it because it's not just venture capital, actually. So the fund itself was inspired by this organization called Temasek, which was started about 50 years ago to this year in Singapore, and laid out a thesis that we have been inspired by with the O.H.I.O Fund, and which truly we're trying to emulate in our playbook and rollout of what the fund is going to do and to invest in and help to realize. But it was broader than a venture fund. It was opportunistic in that it was able to invest in anything, really. At its onset in Singapore, Temasek was investing in a steel mill, in a bird park, in an airline that became Singapore Airlines, and really a whole variety of mechanisms, both in terms of assets, so direct company investments, but also new company creation, debt instruments. So it was really kind of a broad mandate, but tethered to a place and a belief in the opportunity that place had. And so the O.H.I.O Fund is inspired by Temasek and what it did there, and hasn't really been attempted before in America. We haven't had kind of a place-based fund that has that level of flexibility in it prior. So kind of an experiment in and of itself, but I think gives us the flexibility to be opportunistic to capitalize on a lot of those structural trends that we talked about. And again, if you believe that there is that opportunity, and again, you think what has to happen for Ohio to capitalize on those trends, the O.H.I.O Fund, we want to be the activation energy, the catalyst to bring together Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, Dayton, Youngstown, the whole state really, to invest and rally around the kinds of things that need to happen for Ohio to realize those opportunities.
How did you get involved with the fund? I can't believe I didn't ask that first.
So through a lot of ways, it's fun in retrospect to try and connect the dots, because it feels a lot easier than to try and presently have predicted what they were, because they feel really hard to have predicted. But the founding team of the O.H.I.O Fund, the idea came from Ray Leach here in Cleveland and Mark Kwame in Columbus. Ray is the founding CEO of Jumpstart here in Cleveland, and had actually invested in and joined the board of Axuall in its earlier days. And so through a combination of Ray leading our board, through which he was essentially my boss, and the work that I had done with Lay of the Land, when I had stepped away from Axuall, Ray kind of incepted into my mind the idea for what the O.H.I.O Fund would become. And it felt too sufficiently compelling for me to want to pursue anything else. It just felt like the right culmination of the set of experiences I had through trying to build a company here in Ohio, through getting to meet hundreds of founders within Ohio, and a real belief and recognition that I had kind of developed on my own about the opportunity that we have here in Ohio to tap into this kind of latent excellence and capacity that we have for building things and really innovation writ large. And so I feel very lucky and privileged to be part of the team, but it came from the relationship that I had developed with Ray through my time here in Cleveland, and a desire to want to work with them to help make this thing happen.
Isn't it crazy to think about? You never know the relationships you have and who you're going to meet and what it could lead to. I mean, you probably never would have anticipated this.
No, I mean, if you told my New York City boy self that I would be here in Cleveland investing in the future of Ohio, where I have no ties, I mean, that I would be like, what are you talking about?
Well, we're happy to have you. Ohio's a great place. I think it's the Midwest charm.
It is.
It's very disarming. We're all very friendly.
Yes. No, and I'm happy to be here.
So this is an election year, and I have no intention of making this podcast political, trust me, but elections can impact investment decisions, especially at the level you guys are, the conversations you're having. And I know that states compete strongly against one another to attract more venture capital money. I know the O.H.I.O Fund isn't all about VC, but in your opinion, what does Ohio need to do from a marketing perspective to better attract more VC money to the state?
Well, I think telling a story that resonates and demonstrating the kinds of things that we're able to do that couldn't be done elsewhere. I mean, it really is the mission of the O.H.I.O Fund, I think, in a lot of ways, to demonstrate that capability. When you think about the kinds of things that we'll be able to do and the things that we're investing in, these are not things that could really happen in New York City or in San Francisco. There is a place-based component that uniquely positions Ohio to be able to, I think, demonstrate the advantage structurally that we have compared to some other places in the country. At the same time, I think we could, there's some other low-hanging fruit. We could probably do less cringy marketing that I've seen in New York about trying to, pitch Ohio.
I've never seen it, but in terms of never seen it in person, but I've seen some of those campaigns and I go, oh.
It's like, I don't know, it's tough. It's tough as someone who's trying to advocate and truly actually likes this place now. And as a New Yorker, I'm like, why did they do that?
Yeah.
But no, I think, so anecdotally, in the last few years, specifically after the pandemic, I've seen a real resurgence of people boomeranging back, people who grew up here, who have gone elsewhere to New York, to San Francisco, to DC, to Boston, have really kind of flexed their professional muscles and have achieved a lot of really amazing things. People love Ohio. Like, the people who are from Ohio love it. And it's like to a degree that's like strange and weird and awesome at the same time.
Come on now. Can't say that.
No, but
I'm kidding.
But I think we haven't done a great job trying to, we have this love of this place. The people who are from here, who are elsewhere right now, I think would love the opportunity, if they were aware of what is happening here, to participate. And I think it's the importance of storytelling and amplifying the awesomeness of the things that are happening here. So it's much in the spirit of the podcast, and again, what you're doing, and just trying to make more people aware of the greatness of this place.
I think it's interesting with people like podcasts like you, and how we have a podcast here at Vivid Front, obviously Marketing Moves, what everyone's listening to, that there just needs to be more positive stories about Cleveland, because
100%.
To your point, as Clevelanders, we can make fun of Cleveland, but at the same time, it's important that we're also sharing why we love it so much and why we can kind of make those jokes lightheartedly. But it's a great place. I mean, I tell all my friends, I'm never leaving Ohio. Lived here my whole life, and I have no ambition or no inclination to want to leave here.
Yeah, it's a great place.
It is. Don't have crazy natural disasters, great healthcare, it's affordable to live, all the things that you care about.
Yes, but I think to the degree that you can make other people aware of that, specifically those who know what it is like here and who are elsewhere, and also people who are not from here, I think that would go a long way.
Absolutely. It was hard for me to narrow down and determine my final question for you, Jeffrey, as we could really go a lot of different ways with your story, and just what you're doing is super fascinating. With that said, my final question is, what advice do you have for anyone looking to break into the venture capital space? How does someone get their start?
So with my founder hat on, having been on the flip side of, hundreds of conversations with investors trying to raise money, and having been rejected, about as many times, and having worked with a lot of investors who I greatly appreciate and admire, I think the strongest investors are those who are able to empathize with the founder journey. And so to the degree that as an investor, you can empathize with the entrepreneurial journey, it lends credence to the advice that you're offering, to the set of experiences that you've encountered and how that relates to the day-to-day work that the founder is going through. And so my advice would be, if someone wants to get into investing, it would be to first, try and understand what it is because I think it's a bit difficult to be of service and of value to the entrepreneur if you don't know what it is that they're going through.
Mm-hmm. It's great advice. Well, before we end today's episode, I'm going to rattle off a few rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Favorite podcast?
This one.
You know what? I had a feeling you were going to say that, and I was like, that's great. Thank you. What's your favorite thing about Cleveland?
The people, the nature, most everything about it.
What's your favorite Cleveland restaurant?
Ooh, I have to go Doug Katz. His whole family of restaurants are the best. Zug is up there for me.
So good. So good. Last question. Favorite Cleveland coffee shop?
Well, as I spoke, and I take nothing away from Doug, I do have to reinsert Mitchell's into my answer.
Oh my gosh, I'm at Mitchell's. far too often. It's way too close.
That place is my true weakness.
Oh, yeah. It's so cool that you can see everything being made, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the best ice cream in the world. That's my
hot take. That is, we have that on record.
Good. I want it on the internet forever.
So do you like ice cream more than coffee? Do you not have a favorite coffee shop?
Yes. I appreciate coffee for other people's appreciation of coffee. You know, it's a drink for me. Caffeine doesn't really do it. I like coffee places. I go to Edda all the time. Mm-hmm. I love Lecco. But coffee is just not my thing.
That's fair. Are you a tea drinker? You're just a water.
I'm a hydro homie. I like water, you know.
Nothing wrong with that. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much, and I know our listeners did too. Where can our listeners find you if they want to connect?
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for having me. A true pleasure and privilege to be here. I would point them to the podcast, to Lay of the Land. You could find it on any podcast player, or just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Easy enough. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashtyn.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Now it's time to start making moves. Head to vividfront.com/marketing moves for exclusive marketing materials. Every episode, we add more of our greatest insider secrets to help you move towards success. See you next time.